Welcome, Pam. I'm so pleased to have you with us today to talk about creativity and play. And I think maybe we'll start with you describing how you came to be a writer, because you being a journalist, a teacher, a writer, words are your thing, obviously. So how about you tell us a little bit about your background?
Well, thank you, Mary. I'm excited to be here. And I always say that I kind of went into the family business.
Hmm.
My mother went to school. She was actually a political science major, and she taught middle school in the late 1950s and despised it. And she started out she started out freelance writing. And I can remember from a very early age, I can distinctly maybe second grade, where they had you fill out little index cards of, what does your mother do? Well, it's the 60s. Your mother's a housewife and your father does whatever. And I always remember putting down, even then, my mother was a freelance writer.
Hmm.
So that was instilled in me pretty early. And I have a voracious love of reading, and so I guess therefore words. So it never occurred to me that I would want to be anything else than someone who works with words. So I say I followed in my mother's footsteps.
Mm-hmm. That's fascinating. So it was always part of your identity, even
Yes,
as a young kid.
definitely. Definitely. I remember there was a comic strip called Brenda Starr in the 60s, and she was a glamorous reporter, and her boyfriend had one eye patch over his eye, and he was mysterious. And I don't know, probably the mysterious boyfriend was as appealing as the writing part of the job. But I always knew this is what I wanted from an early age. I wanted to tell people stories.
That's fantastic.
Mm.
And how did that evolve? Did you start your craft in childhood?
Started, it's interesting you say play. My favorite thing to do is play with my Barbie dolls, but have these elaborate ongoing stories that played out over weeks after school, and romance between the two Kens, and sometimes GI Joe came in, and it was just I liked that storytelling aspect. And I like to write starting probably in elementary school. I was a big reader. Nancy Drew, Trixie Belden, all those stories. And I would write little short stories. Even then, I wanted to write, ideas down, and this is what happened to these people. So yeah, from a very early age. And in tandem at the time, my mother there were four of us kids at home, and my father always wanted her, he was a school administrator, and he always wanted her to go get a teaching job. But there were nepotism policies, so she couldn't even get a job in the same town.
Oh my goodness.
Yes. So she started out, she sold her first short story in 1965, when we were all, I don't know how, I mean, I know how old I was, and to Highlights for Children, which was a pretty well-known children's magazine. And so I remember distinctly, she wrote a play for my birthday one year when I was 6 or something. So at the same time, my mother is starting to earn a few dollars, a few. I didn't have a money concept, but I knew that my mother did something with words, and I liked words, and I just wanted to do that. So
that's remarkable.
it's just, it's,
You had a calling.
yes. And as we'll talk about in a little bit, I mean, we ended up writing together for almost 25 years. So it was, yes,
So how
definitely
did that evolve?
That evolved. I went to school and became a journalist, a newspaper reporter. I wanted to tell real people's stories. And my mother went on to have a successful career as a romance writer. and she had some excellent editors, and she wrote during the 1980s. It was kind of the heyday of romance. And then, you know, like everything, it sort of went off in a different direction, and she was ready to be done for a while. And then I think it was after, well, I know it was when I was pregnant with my first son. And she said, well, do you want to write something together? And I said, well, and I was teaching just part-time at the time. And she lived in, I think, gosh, she may have lived in Wisconsin or Iowa. Isn't that funny? I think she lived in Iowa. And we lived in Arizona. And she said, do you want to try writing something together? And I said, well, that would be fun. And my father at the time was like, why are you teaming up with her? You know, I mean, which is kind of not very positive approach.
Not very supportive.
No, and my mother said,
either
well,
of you.
yeah, so my mother said, well, I'm not making any money right now, so what is, you know, we're going to do this together. So we wrote a mystery that stank. It was terrible. I think it's probably, I mean, it's long been since burned, but we, you know, we, then we did, there was a weird hybrid. It was sort of science fiction romances. And I wanted to try something different than what my mother had done. So they weren't very lucrative, but we had fun writing them. And then we wrote, we had a really lovely editor who had been my mom's first editor. And she actually bought our first contemporary romance that we wrote together. And then she said, and this was the best thing for many years. We worked for Harlequin, which is it. We were just talking about Toronto, and they were starting a romantic comedy series of books. And my mom and I sort of fit into that niche market, and we had quite a bit of fun writing romantic comedies. It was really fun. And we did that, and then we went on to write women's fiction for Guideposts and mysteries. And, you know, we had a really good, about 25 years. She had written 19 books on her own. Then I think, I have it written down somewhere. We wrote probably a total together of 50, 55.
That's extraordinary.
And we,
amazing.
And people always said, you know, how on earth do you write with your mother?
That was what I was going
I was just going to say, I know the question you're going to ask me.
and how do you write with another person?
Right. Well, and everybody, well,
in terms of,
we always said that our model was kind of the way TV writers work. 6 people around a table is how we envisioned it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it started out, she was, you know, teaching me how to write fiction. She was always the wonder, just her characters were always so wonderful, but she always struggled with plots. And I love plotting, my characters were not so great. And she said to me at the beginning, you write like a journalist, we have to stop that. But what she meant, you know.
And what, in that you were giving too much detail, too much?
No, in that I was writing too short. It was too short. Yeah. Too succinct, yes.
Yeah.
So, and over the years, it evolved. It used to be that I would write the synopsis, and then she would write a first chapter, and then I would edit it. And by the end of, you know, by the middle, the later to later, we pretty much, we could each write a chapter and have it sound the same. Mm-hmm. It was sort of, I always say it was symbiotic.
Mm-hmm.
It was simply, you know, perhaps it was because we were a mother and daughter and we were so close. Mm-hmm. But we pretty much, and sometimes we did some crazy things like write a whole book in a month. One time, our publisher needed a book in a month, and we did it. It was over Christmas, and we did it, and we just traded off chapters, and I had to edit them and make sure we sounded alike, but we did that. And I always, the stock answer to back up was always, well, we never did it in the same room. We never, I mean, we'd have story conferences and then we would go to our separate corners.
So you each had your creative space.
Yes. And I know people over the years, she had friends, 35 years ago, who wrote children's books, and they actually sat side by side and wrote together. Now, we never, no, did that.
Would that have been too much, do you think?
Yeah, we couldn't have. That would have been crazy for us. So it was simply
that sort of physical separation at least.
And I think, and I know other writers who've had collaboration do the same thing. They trade off chapters, or maybe characters sometimes also. So, it's something. I mean, the word that I always use is symbiotic. We just sort of were on the same wavelength.
That's quite amazing, really, to have that totally in sync. Writer's voice. That's quite an accomplishment.
It was fun. I mean, it was a job. That's the other piece of it. Is this was a job. This was not, a side light. It was our job. It was our career and our job, and it wasn't, if we had a deadline, that deadline had to be met. It wasn't like something,
And hence the question, I find it amazing that you wrote a book in a month over Christmas. How do you do that?
Well, my mother, we would figure out say it had to be 65,000 words. And we figured out each of us had to write a certain amount of words per day. And we took, I believe, Christmas Day off. And my birthday's the day after Christmas. I think I don't know if we worked on that day, but it was simply, this is how you do it. And you just get the words out, and the interesting thing about writers, when in genre fiction, a lot of people that I've known over the years either go by words or pages. How many pages a day or how many words? And my mother was the word person. This is how many words you need per day, and that was sort of the way I came up through the family business. You do these many words a day, and you just do it.
What if the creative muse is not with you that day?
That's the, I said earlier, my father-in-law, who is a retired physics professor, asked me that once. I was working at their home, and he said, what if the muse isn't with you that day? And I said, it doesn't matter. We have a deadline. It's a job. We have a deadline. The muse has to come, and the words have to come, and they might stink, but then you have to make them not stink because you have the deadline. So sometimes the muse is teasing you, but you just have to get those words out.
So you would you just plonk down words and hope for the editing process to maybe have that muse inspire a correction, or
self-editing, like get the words out? Self-editing, get the words out, and then of course it's always a process. You have the editors, the copy editors, and they're going to go back and tell you what to do. But when you turn that final and product, because it kind of is it's more than a product, but when you turn that final manuscript in, you want it to be the best you can be. So you just have to sort of force that muse, and not everyone agrees with that. And and not everyone writes for publication. Some people write for their own pleasure. But my mother wrote for publication because that was her job, and I followed that. That was how I viewed it also.
Did you find pleasure in doing that?
Oh yes. It's a great, you make things up. It's a great thing to do. It was wonderful. I loved working with my mother. I can't envision, I always used to say, my vocation and my avocation were one and the same, and are one and the same.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I love books. I love to read, you know, and I got to make a living for a very long time writing books.
Mm-hmm.
So there was great pleasure. But at the same time, it was never an option not to get the job done, or not to have something out on you know, to speculation, because not everything you write sells even to the same publisher that you work for. So it was always fun, and I think it's a great job, but it was also a job.
And you also proved to yourself that you could do it, which
Right.
must have brought a lot of personal satisfaction.
It was, and it was very gratifying to be able to keep up with my mother, to be an equal partner, to be able to, you know, she'd been doing it for years and years and years, and to say, I can do this too, I can write more than one chapter or two chapters. It was like a learn as you go process also.
Yeah, so it was a journey from, I imagine, being somewhat of a junior partner into
Yes.
an equal partner.
Yes, exactly. When I started out, I was not an equal partner.
Mm-hmm.
And as I went along, I became an equal partner, and that was very gratifying, very exciting, very, I can do this, you know. Because she always would say, my goal for you is when I retire that you just do everything, which at the end, you know, I was. But, you know, so it was a very, it's kind of, you know, so things when you say, how can I write something? Well, it's that old, you sit in the chair and you start writing. You know, a lot of people talk about writing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So in many ways, it was a journey mother to child, because that actually reflects life's journey as well. Like,
yes,
the child is the junior partner of a parent, and then you equal, and then you take over. So it's parallel, isn't it?
It's really parallel, and
emotional, I imagine, as a result.
I know it's, what year is this? 6 years ago, we were still actively writing together. My mother got very ill, and she almost died. She's 85 now. And she recovered somewhat. And it's interesting. She also always had an interest in doing art, collage art, and different types of art. I have a picture, and kind of.
Oh,
one, and then this is,
yeah. Oh, I love it.
And here, let me. That was something she always had that as her hobby.
Mm-hmm.
And she
also
did. She's always creative. She always said she would have liked to be a painter, but she's not good at drawing. So she always did. She liked assemblage art. This was something she liked as a hobby. So she got sick. She got out of the hospital. We have art professor friends. She actually had her first art show at our university, has a gallery in it, and she had her first art show at 80, with featuring her collages. So it was really fantastic. We called her Grandma Moses, but she did not. But and we were still writing, although we'd had deadlines, which was very difficult while she was sick and in the hospital, and I was doing the deadlines, and I had a friend actually who would edit stuff for me to help me out. But we reached a point where we decided to be done with writing. She was sick, and I did not have the heart to go on my own without her at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And she is doing fine, but she has short-term memory issues. And, you know, we retired, and but it was it took me a long time, because, you know, people would say, don't you want to write on your own? And I'd think, no, because I had a collaborator for 25 years. It pretty much was 25 years. And maybe someday I'll want to write something on my own, but right now I don't have that, you know.
Well, I would imagine you have to change your writing identity
Yes.
to being a solo writer once
Mhm.
again. It's very hard to do, as you say, after 25 years,
Yeah.
a lifetime together, and also that unique mother-daughter relationship.
Right.
I imagine there's an amount of grief
Mhm.
as well,
Oh,
uh,
definitely.
that you have to go through all those stages of letting
Hmm.
go and acceptance and
Definitely. It's
starting
sometimes
over.
sometimes I look at at the, not just the books we've written, but the art projects, the collages that she has done that are intricate. And honestly, she had a steampunk period. I mean, her intricate steampunk collages. And it was very hard for a while I tried to see if she would like to still do it, but she couldn't even, manipulate the glue.
Mm.
Which is it is a very big grieving period. And I think that I think I finally made peace with it. And it's funny because once a year she'll look at me and say, "We should write another book."
Mm.
And I'm
So the
like,
fire is still in her.
"Yeah." So it's interesting. I'm like, "Well, do you really want to?" And we talk. So I think to that end, I mean, someday I might want to write something, but right now I don't have that interest. And you talk about COVID. You want to talk about the COVID creativity?
Mm-hmm.
I think my creativity went out the window long before COVID.
Mm.
It happened when my mother got sick, and when people talk about during this period, it's interesting. And the people you talk to, either people are super creative or they're not.
Mm-hmm.
Or they feel like they should be, and it's like, why should you be? Just getting out of bed might be good if you're that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's an interesting period that we're in.
It is because it's so volatile and unknown. And in terms of COVID, it's a global shared experience. Uh, and everything else seems so basically seems like there's no foundation anymore. And I think for some of us it takes longer to process that and use creativity as a way to explain it. um, and I think also in your case there's so many different layers because it's your mom and your mom is with you, so every day there's a lot of care for her. And I can imagine it's very hard, especially since this disease attacks the elderly.
Right.
It's very hard to bring your attention into a creative space.
Mm-hmm. It is. And it's, I'm always a voracious reader, and I've been reading more than ever. Some people I know have said I can't read anymore. I'm like, well, this is a great time to read. I mean, this is a great time to be a bibliophile. Our library was closed for months and months. Well, I have my own library at home. So this is, there are advantages, but it is a hard time. It's just a hard time. Mm-hmm.
It's a hard time. It's a hard time to play.
Yes, it is a hard time to play.
Yeah. But it's also a great time to play in that maybe that's a way to find light.
Mm-hmm. That's a good way. And it sort of forces you, I think, to find new ways to play. The outdoors is more important than ever. You get outside during this time period, you don't feel so, hunkered down and prisoner.